Hello and welcome to the Female Executive Survival Guide podcast. I'm Lauren Eyles, an executive coach and mentor with a ton of leadership and board experience to share. Leadership can be lonely, so I'm here to introduce you to amazing leaders so you can learn from us and get to where you want to be quicker. Welcome everyone. Today we'll be talking about what it's like to be the only woman on an executive team. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that this is recorded on the lands of the Awabakal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, feeling like a fish out of water. I remember feeling like this in my first executive role 11 years ago. You finally make it to the table, you look around and there aren't many people that you can relate to at all. It can be quite lonely at times, and I found that there was no roadmap for how to lead on my own terms or what success looked like. To combat this loneliness, I found inspiration in other women executives like Dr Kirsten Molloy, today's guest. Welcome, Kirsten.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I met Kirsten when she was the CEO in one of the world's largest supply chains, leading the Hunter Valley Cold Chain Coordinator. And I was in my first executive role at the Port of Newcastle. So this is going back about 11 years, and there really weren't many senior women in our industry. I was so inspired seeing Kirsten lead with confidence and authenticity. Not only did she earn the respect of the whole industry, a very masculine industry, but she continued to be herself, smart, down to earth, and stylish. When I felt self-conscious, seeing Kirsten's coloured nail polish and knee-high boots gave me confidence to be myself and show up as a woman. Kirsten is an experienced board chair and non-executive director with a range of organisations, including private companies, non-profits, mutual membership-based organisations, and government-owned corporations. Before becoming a CEO, she held executive roles in global resources, manufacturing, and logistics companies. She's also a great advocate for diversity and inclusion and engaging business leaders to be part of the change. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you. It's always interesting when that all gets read out. I realise how long you've been around.
Haven't we all?
Yeah, well.
I just had lunch with a friend and I said, it's just dawned on me that no one's coming to save us with all the answers. We are that generation now. It's up to all of us.
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you feel when you took on your first executive role?
I was really excited, but also terrified. And I would say that's kind of every role, every promotion. It was the same feeling from when I was sort of on my first management team reporting to the general manager a long time ago, well more than 11 years. It was very similar to how I felt when I was appointed to the CEO role of HVCCC. So it's a combination of excited and scared, but always being drawn to want to do it and give it a go, and sort of the interest and excitement outweighing kind of the fear factor. But you know, these are new environments and new situations, and you don't know all the answers. And as you go through your career, you realise you know less and less of the answers, and that you've got a lot to learn. So you know, I love learning about new roles and different roles, but yeah, I certainly have walked into many over the years, you know, not knowing how it's going to go, how I'm going to do it, do I know what I need to know, but kind of just backing yourself enough to go, you'll figure it out. You figured it out before, you'll figure it out again. So yeah, it's the same feeling, I guess, with every promotion, every change.
I can relate, and I think it's actually healthy, and a good sign of a good leader to walk in knowing that you don't know everything, and being committed to figuring out the nuances of that organisation and sector, and it's a dynamic system in itself.
Totally. And I did actually, it was a Women in Leadership program that I was sponsoring, I guess, as an exec at the time, and we had a male leader tell a group of women they'd never been afraid. Never been, you know,
never.
And so for me, that's either just not true, or that's a little bit scary if it is true, because to have never felt, you know, uncomfortable or nervous or is quite, I'm sure it's just very, very unlikely. Or if it has happened, then there's something else going on that's a bit of worry. But that lack of vulnerability, then showing that in front of that group, is almost saying, if you feel that, infers there's something wrong, which is not true. I think we all feel fear or a nervousness or at different times, and lack confidence as well. Confidence isn't something that just sits at a high level. It goes up and down.
Absolutely. I was really fortunate early in my career at a young professionals event. We had a senior male business leader come in and generously share with us that he still got nervous with public speaking even that night, and he would have been old enough to be our dad. And I still think of him and appreciate the vulnerability that he shared, because he normalised that feeling for us straight away early in our careers. And like we're doing today, that sharing with other emerging leaders is such a gift, because then it helps them sit with the uncomfortable feelings but keep moving forward.
How helpful is that compared to, the complete opposite? So, I've definitely had the full range of emotions, and excitement and fear kind of sit on the same spectrum. And so you can sort of bounce from one to the other. And I think that is kind of normal.
Absolutely. So how did you go about building your confidence as a leader when you moved into these really senior roles?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think confidence, like I say, it's something that is variable, and it can be variable within a day, within an hour perhaps, or it can be quite persistent, if you're feeling, at a low ebb. So for me, when I think about, when it was a time that I sort of had to build my confidence, sort of back up, and how did I do that? And, I worked with a coach. As you know, I'm a big supporter of having a coach, and that really helped me to think about strategies to approach kind of building confidence as a leader or in any other role. And it was really, some of it was around seeking feedback, because the voice in my head was not helpful and I was undermining myself, I think, and I needed to kind of work out, was what I'm telling myself right or wrong? Is it true or not true? Or how true is it? So getting, trusted people to give you good feedback, and so you can just gauge yourself a little bit better, and also realise that most people aren't thinking about you that much or that hard. We think about ourselves thousands upon thousands of times more than we think about other people. So it was just sort of getting a bit more reasonable about how much people what they might be thinking of you, validating that, and then realising that they won't be thinking about you anywhere near as much as you are, to just try and help your own self-talk be more positive and more reasonable, and looking, because you can tell yourself something and then you go, well, what's the evidence for that? And there is none. It's just something that's going around in your head from history or from things you've been told in the past. So validating with other people, and trying, when it comes to leadership, it's a practice. So I've done lots of study and different degrees and different courses, and they've all been, or most have certainly been incredibly helpful, but it is actually knowing that it's a practice and it's something that you do, and as you do more of it, you will get better at it, like most things, if you're purposeful and deliberate in how you want to go about it. And you learn from your mistakes and you reflect. And I think it's also knowing that you're going to make mistakes. I have made many. I've made so many, some big, some small, but done things where I thought I would do that differently next time. And then when you try that again, the next time you do it, you can go, oh, I did do that better. So you build confidence from that and then you just develop, what works, or what works better, and you just keep building on that. So I think back to a time when I was a very, very new young manager, and I needed to give someone feedback, and in the scale of sort of feedback, it was pretty at the mild end. This was not performance management. It wasn't, but it was still difficult to tell someone older than me, very experienced in their job, that there was something they needed to be doing differently to improve. And I really was nervous about that conversation. And so I just set up the meeting, thought that's good, set up the meeting, went into it, had brought that up and handled it really badly. Like, I handled it badly for them, for me. I thought I'll just wing it. I'll just figure it out in the conversation. I kind of know what I need to say, and I'll say it. And the other person got a bit upset and sort of pushed back a bit, and I wasn't really expecting that. And then I went away and thought, well, it went horribly badly. And, you know, it's really obvious, but you should plan these things, even if it seems like a small thing, and you plan it from the perspective as, what do I need them to know? How might they react? What will I do if, and as those sorts of discussions escalate to sort of very significant discussions where someone's career might be, you know, impacted, they're really important. And I would spend way more time on prep than I would even in the actual discussion. And I would have people, whether it was a HR business partner but people around to role play with, to practice with, to make sure and that I was on point. So, you know, you're not always going to do everything super well, but it is sitting back and going, how could I have done that better? And thinking about, well, what could happen? What are the worst things that could happen, and how do I minimise the likelihood of that happening? So having, you know, good plan, process, and putting that effort in. You need to respect the space that you're walking into and lean into it, because it's being avoidant around those things is protecting yourself rather than, it's often masked as, oh, I don't want to tell someone something because I'm worried about how they'll react. You're actually probably more worried about yourself and how you'll, you know, your own discomfort in the situation. And you sort of just have to lean into the fact it is uncomfortable, but how do I best prepare for that? So that's not just around giving people feedback, but that's all aspects of leadership. How do I best prepare for different situations?
Yeah. Well, good on you for sitting with the discomfort of something not going as ideally as you'd plan, and adding to your toolkit and leaning back in with new techniques and tools and time, because it is still a difficult thing and an uncomfortable thing at any stage in your career, but it's essential. And avoidance just sweeps it under a rug, and that kind of gets bigger. We all remember feedback that was delivered with sensitivity and care and was constructive, and I think we can all remember feedback that was not well thought out and maybe wasn't well informed, came from a narrow perspective that didn't consider the broader aspects of the situation.
Absolutely.
So really important share there to encourage others to sit with the discomfort, lean in and see it as a craft.
Absolutely. I think so. And it's, again, it's a practice.
So one of the things I found mysterious when I joined an executive team was figuring out the unwritten rules of success. So there are a lot of ways and norms and things that were unspoken, that they're not in the employee handbook. And at that table, you've got to get up to speed very quickly. And sometimes those norms can be something you've never encountered before. Do you think it's true that there's unwritten rules of success, and how do you go about figuring them out when you join a new board or group of leaders?
I think there is. I mean, that's, you know, where sort of culture comes from, isn't it? It's how we do things, but it's not necessarily written down. In fact, it's often not written down. And yeah, every group will have their own, and what works in one group will not work in another, or will not be as effective. I think that for me, it's really certainly trying to understand your manager as well as possible, so that they, you know, there's good clarity on what they expect of you, what you're doing in working for them. And I was told really early in my career, and at the time it didn't make sense to me, but someone said, oh, you need to manage your manager. And so working out parameters and boundaries and expectations of that relationships is what I think that means, and what it came to mean to me. So really understanding what they are looking for and what they want and need. And then when you get into a broader team, for me, it's really, I'm generally very curious about sort of every element of the business. So I was never a great one for just staying in my lane. So I always had a lot of questions, and I always wanted to understand a lot about what was going on and why, and quite intuitive too around people. So just giving yourself, again, time and space to learn the people, the business, the relationships, and understanding what people are trying to achieve, and how they're going about that. And yeah, basically just watching, listening, learning as much as possible. In terms of sort of some of the unwritten rules or the things, I made a comment once, which was really off the cuff. It wasn't a criticism of anyone. It was just an off the cuff comment. And that really upset someone in that room. And I didn't know for a really, really long time that had happened, but that actually had an impact. And on some of my sort of relationships with colleagues and things like that, because it was taken in a way it certainly wasn't intended. And this comes from sort of assumptions that you have that, and I'm generally someone who, I'm pretty diplomatic, I'm quite kind, I never intentionally upset people, but inadvertently I did, and it had this impact. And again, I didn't know about that for a long time, and that can, there's ego, and there's all sorts of things going on for people. Sometimes people are just having a bad day and might not respond well to something, and it can be quite hard to always read or know those situations. So if they occur and it's obvious, you can step into, again, a situation and have a discussion, or try and understand where someone's coming from, where it might be different from you. And sometimes they're just quite invisible, which can, lead to that lack of inclusion, or somehow, you're being left out of a few things because something that I felt was small, but someone else may not have, the way they took it has impacted. So I haven't got a perfect answer for navigating the hidden rules, but just working to understand things as much as possible. And to be honest, if there's if it's way too political, or way too many hidden rules, or way too hard to sort of figure out and understand, then that tells you a fair bit about the culture, and is it where you want to be.
That's a really good point. A lot of things are not in the brochure. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. And understanding cultures before you join a team or organisation is quite difficult. I think once you're in it, you can feel it and sense it, but from the outside, it's harder to tell. But again, all you can do is show curiosity, ask as many people as you know, as many questions as you can, and go from there.
One of the first great learnings I had when I started my MBA was learning about the Tuckman model, that teams go through the process of forming, coming together, storming, testing each other out, reshaping, negotiating the norms, developing the norms, like the ways of doing things, and then getting to a point where they're actually performing before they actually adjourn, and going through that cycle every time someone new joins. And that was actually quite liberating to think about teams that I'd led, where I'd had to pull different teams together under pressure for things that were happening in our external environment that we didn't see coming and had to respond to. And you do generally get a bit of testing the waters, pushing the boundaries, because people are coming in with norms, personal norms, but norms within that organisation. There might be a siloed culture going on where it might be actually a bit competitive. The person they report to might not be truly a team player. And for me, that model just normalised constructive conflict and made me go, okay, this is something I need to just sit with and find comfort in and lean into, rather than wanting to just back away from it.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good model to think about. And I know that, in different roles, we've definitely used it. Oh, it's just, we're in a storming phase here. And it does help as people try to come together, but maybe are struggling to do that. But you're all trying to figure out what those boundaries are, and what's okay, what's not okay, and what's going to work, and who, and having some balance across the team. So as a leader, one of the things I've always tried to do is to have everybody able to contribute, and not have a dominant group or person, but to try and tap into all the skills in the room and all the knowledge in the room. But everyone's really extrovert to introvert, or whatever. There's so many different parameters you can look at people and everyone sits, where they sit. So sometimes it's focusing on, bringing out the quieter person, or and trying to help that storming process to be as constructive and lead to ultimately norming and then performing. But it is helpful to know that those phases occur. So again, if it helps people sit with the discomfort or any dissonance that they're experiencing, that's sort of normal. And I think on that, talk about confidence in leadership, I think it's getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you're you need to sit with unknowns and discomfort or dissonance, or things not working how you envisaged, or you need to be able to sit with that to then be open to, okay, well, how do we solve it, rather than backing away from it.
And I think sometimes where we have tried something or had a conversation that we didn't think was a big conversation that turned out to be kind of a high stakes thing, and we've hit a nerve, how we respond in that moment and how we recover from that in the next conversation is really important. But I found that can actually build trust and relationships if we just sit with the discomfort and resist the urge to defend ourselves, but kind of sit there with curiosity and try and tease out what's really happening and acknowledge that there's some feelings happening. Have you found that?
Definitely. I think that sitting with curiosity, because feedback's interesting, in terms of, I tell people it's a gift, you can sort of open it up and keep it, or you can chuck it out. It's really up to you how you decide to take it on and what to do with it. But sitting there curious and open to it, I think is important, because you will hear things you don't want to hear. And I've, both been the subject of as well as the leader of those difficult discussions. And I know in some cases where I was, being the one having the robust discussion with someone and giving them some feedback, and some of those relationships absolutely flourished because of the person listening. They might have resisted, they might have been unhappy, but ultimately it's coming from a place of, I'm trying to help, and these things will help you. And the response to that being, I'm going to try these things, but I want to know if they're working. And I remember I got a very tough piece of feedback from someone I respected enormously. And it was done, he'd clearly thought about it. He went very direct, which is the personality and also the best, rip the Band-Aid off, because sort of being half told or hinted at is not helpful, certainly not for me. And it was really, really tough to hear. And I can still feel my sense of sort of shrinking as I was sort of told, there's some things you're doing, they're not helpful, wasn't a good contribution to the discussion, etc. And but I believed him, and I looked back and thought, I think he's right. Like, I can see why he's telling me this, and I am so grateful that he had the guts to do it. And I'm sure he was very consistent in his career around having the guts to do it, because he wasn't my boss. He didn't have to. He did it because he wanted to help me, and he thought I wasn't doing as well as I could. And I looked back to him a few months later, and he said, I can see you're really trying. I said, I really am. And he said, I can see it, and it's better. And I went, okay, thank God. And it is. I've also had feedback from, it was my boss at the time, and I was very young in my first senior role, nearly entirely male team. And I got a really good performance review because I was getting everything done in a pretty complex environment with lots of stakeholders, not much, lots of stakeholders, very indirect sort of influencing type role. I had a team as well, but it was complicated. So I was doing everything and getting outcomes, but he told me I had to be more directive, that I was not directive enough as a leader. And even at that stage, I went away and I thought about that pretty hard. And I can tell you now, being a highly directive female leader in a male-dominated environment, at that point in time, career suicide.
Yeah, it's a very tricky one.
It's very tricky, and it's not my style. Like, I'm a highly collaborative, participative type of leader. I like to draw from the people around me and work things out, which drives some people crazy because it's a lot of talking sometimes, but that's the style I'm comfortable with. But it also is a way of getting people on board with ideas and direction, because you don't sit there rudderless in those conversations. You know, there can be a purposefulness, and you're working out how to navigate something, and you might adjust based on what you're talking about with your team. But, you know, you generally sort of have an idea of where you want to head, but you do want to draw people into that. So it sort of means you get good alignment, but and good level of cooperation and collaboration, which is what the performance review said. But so I just rejected that. Like, I couldn't, it just was never going to work for me as the person that I am. And it's not to say I can't be directive. I've managed a crisis team, and believe me, you are directive in that scenario. So that idea, you have to have a sort of a range of leadership styles. I think there's an element of truth to that, but we all have the style we want to be probably a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And in the exceptional times, like when you've got a crisis and you can't enter into debate, decisions have to be made rapidly. You can do that, and you will do that. But it's not how you're going to run, you know, your teams all of the time. So there is absolutely, you know, I think your point about curiosity is important. Like, why is someone saying this to me? What does it mean to me? And does it change anything about what I'm doing? And in my first example, yes, I did change how I was approaching some things. And in the second example, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I kind of reject that feedback. It's not helpful for me. I now realise, now I'm a much more senior person, I've got much more leadership experiences. That was a real limitation for that manager not to recognise that he recognised I was a highly effective leader, but he still thought I should do it more like he thought I should do it.
More like him?
And I think that's he was quite a directive person. So that's a narrowness in his awareness and understanding of, in fact, the many ways you can actually get things done. Because I had two leaders actually give me that feedback, and both times I just went, yeah, no.
And do you think that was a sign of growth, sort of that you're learning to be discerning about the feedback in that stage, and to know that feedback can be useful, and it's also coming through someone else's filter, the view through which they see the world, which isn't always the whole picture?
Yeah, I think I was very early in my career when I kind of decided the directive thing wasn't helpful for me. And I look back now, I'm quite impressed with myself, because I actually was really quite just instinctive, I guess, at the time. I think the habit of listening to what people say and then going, oh, hang on, is a habit, or is sort of typical of my approach, and probably always has been. So, yeah, I don't know if it was a bit of wisdom, I think, that I managed to capture quite young, because I kind of struggled to know what to do with it. And when I thought about what it would mean, it just didn't make any sense. So I guess I was confident enough to go, just kind of, if I'd got a really lousy performance review linked to the fact I wasn't directive enough, would I have changed anything? I don't know. Because there's also a point at which, like, the second I was much more, it was probably 10 years later that the next person that said that to me. And you just end up going, it's just not someone I need to work with necessarily. So because the view is so narrow, or to be honest, that you just don't pay that much attention. You can do your job and do it well, and just kind of go, well, that's not helpful. I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah, trusting yourself and knowing your own style and your range of leadership styles that people get to know and trust and expect.
Yeah, I guess I got quicker at maybe filtering through some of that stuff and what's worthwhile and what's not. Quicker and more confident with it.
So I was thinking back to the early 2010s when you really led a conversation around diversity in our region, the Hunter region of New South Wales, Australia. And at the time, people weren't really talking about gender in business. And I remember with another colleague, you co-founded a local chapter of United Nations Women, which became the Equal Futures Project. And I remember being at the top table and not mentioning that the event was on because I always went and supported it and I was involved, but I felt awkward about raising a gender thing. Yeah, that's right, for a number of years. And eventually we got to a point where we were taking out tables, and you really did a beautiful job in engaging the business community. And so many men came out and actively supported and participated and learnt. So thank you for that. I certainly also benefited from your advocacy. How did you muster the courage to lead that conversation about gender equity when you're a woman yourself, and you can actually sometimes there's a cost for that? Why did you decide to speak up?
Yeah, it wasn't courage, I don't think. I think it was just necessary. The inequity, it's just creates a massive dissonance for me in general. Mm-hmm. And it was just so abundantly obvious with gender. So I'd been having sort of gender equality discussions for a long time, well before that, before 2011. I've got, I convinced the business to run women in leadership programs in the 2000s. And I realised, so that very first senior role that I got, it was literally like I'd gone through grad programs and sort of junior roles. There was quite a lot of women around. I did quite a lot of male-dominated subjects at uni. That didn't particularly faze me. I felt like I belonged there and I could hold my own and I was fine. So that I didn't feel at all uncomfortable in those environments. But the second I got that senior role, it's literally just like they all disappeared overnight. It was that fast and that profoundly different. And I had believed, I came from a very egalitarian family, and if you're good at science, go do science. Like gender just didn't come into it. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of raised to think, well, yeah, I can do what I want and be anywhere I want, and I'm allowed, able to do that. And so I thought that post the 90s, which is when I was first at uni, we would roll through and, women would just become an equal part of the population of people at work, and the population of leaders would reflect, how many women there are demographically. And that, of course, just really obviously did not happen. And it was sort of early 2000s, and I just was astounded at the lack. And I was the only woman in the room, or one of very few, since then, which is now nearly 25 years. And so, I did start to talk about it. You do have to manage that line, I guess, between being seen to be painful and whinging to trying to shine a light on an issue. And organisations, maybe not so much now, but back then would then turn to the women and say, well, tell us how to solve this problem. It's like, but we don't create the problem. We are not the problem. Actually, the decisions being made by leaders in the business and the culture of the business is creating the problem. So there was always a bit of, oh, would you tell us what we need to do to help you more type thing. And look, I've mostly loved my career. And of course, there's times when I think we all go, oh, God, what have I done? Or I've had enough of this, or, I wish I was sitting on a beach somewhere, not, doing exactly what I'm doing at this moment. But I've loved my career. And it's safe to talk about sort of all the holes in the Swiss cheese lining up, and an incident happens. And I feel like for me, my career, the holes lined up, and I was able to have the career that I've had. And I think those holes line up easier for some groups than others. And it's absolutely borne out in all of the data and all of the research. So there's plenty of places to look all that up. But if that's because I knew loads of amazing women. Half of my MBA cohort were female. And I graduated in 2006. So from my MBA. So we'll really, as we know, we really educate women. We have a lot of women leaving uni, more than half of graduates are women. So but why aren't others moving through that are, amazing and really smarter than me, or cleverer than me, or better at lots of things than I was. So yeah, I just couldn't let that go. It was such an obvious gap, and it just became more and more important over time to try and do something. I don't know, could I have done more? Would I have liked to see the dial shift faster? The pace is positively depressing at times, the pace of change, but it is better than it's ever been. So yeah, so it wasn't courage, it's just necessity. And you learn things like if you're in a large group, like a big forum, if a woman asks the first question, other women are more likely to ask a question. And if a man asks the first question, then mostly men will follow. So believe me, I've been at so many forums, I'm like,
you're leaning
just
in.
to kind of role model.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't really want to ask a question, but I'm going to ask one because I want to try and just create that momentum, because yeah, you're someone who can do that. And it's why I speak at things. It's why, I try and do a lot of things. Set up the volunteer mentoring program a number of years ago, which I don't run anymore, but just to try and move that dial as much as possible.
And it is incredibly powerful when we step forward in courage and be visible and make it safe to be visible. And that was something I was acutely aware of when I chaired the board of Business Hunter for 2 years as the second woman in 138 years. Huge privilege and responsibility, because I knew that if I did it well, I'd make it easier for the next woman and the one after. If I didn't do it well, I'd make it harder.
Mm-hmm.
But I also noticed there was a lot of support from men and women, and I really loved when you could see people's eyes light up if they related to you, men or women, whether it was gender, age, whatever. Something happened and it was like, I can see myself doing that role because I can relate to you. And that for me was really exciting, that when we step forward in courage, we're opening the door of possibility to so many people.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And there's a lot of you can't be what you can't see, but at some point someone has been.
Yes.
And I remember someone years ago saying, "Oh, you're a trailblazer," and I was thinking, that's ridiculous. That is just ridiculous.
But you are.
I'm just doing my thing as best as I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't accept that there's some kind of a norm around, leadership, or that I shouldn't be somewhere because of my gender, maybe because I'm not much good, or maybe because someone's, a better leader than me, or okay, fine. But purely on gender makes zero sense to me. And I think in terms of some of those sort of Equal Futures events and things like that, I mean, I invited exclusively men because we were trying to get more in the room. And I do know it's never possible to really measure the impact, but I do know that lots of people have come up to me afterwards, and sometimes a long time, like years afterwards, and say, "I remember when you said this at that event," because I always had some good, easily found, punchy stats.
Great
there'd be
data.
1 or 2 metrics you'd get across at each one of those events, and people would remember that and think about it. So, so there's some feedback loops that say, yeah, that was good. And I hadn't realised, in fact, when I was leaving my CEO role, there were people saying, we were so thrilled when you were appointed, and again, it's because of your gender, but it's because you're doing something that hasn't, people haven't seen a lot of. And it gives, I guess it is quite inspiring or helpful for people to think, well, maybe I can do that too. So
data is incredibly powerful, and one of the statistics that has stuck with me is from Women on Board's Cultural Diversity survey a couple of years ago, which noted that high 90-something% of directors in Australia are from a Caucasian background, and yet 1 in 3 minimum is born overseas. It could be as high as 50% of Australians are born overseas. So I think we're both acutely aware that we carry a fair bit of privilege, not being from other diverse backgrounds, and the desire that we both shared to work with people and really open the door of opportunity as widely as we can. And you've really championed diversity well beyond gender through Equal Futures projects. So how can leaders champion diversity of all types, and what have you seen or tried that's worked well?
I think around diversity and inclusion and the sense of belonging, and I'm probably more around, okay, how it's about that sense of belonging. So because you can put people in a room that are diverse, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's going to work. And so it's getting the inclusion and the sense of belonging. And I think it's the desire to want to do it. I mean, it's astounding to me. I heard a senior leader basically say it wasn't a priority for the business. This is pre-2010 to worry about gender equality. Who later then quoted it as it's a HR crisis, not a gender crisis, and which showed growth in terms of how they thought about it. But the dismissiveness of that's not really a problem. We're kind of humming along okay. This is a huge problem. And it needed focused and purposeful and deliberate solutions, and still does. And it's the same across all forms of sort of diversity. So one is just caring. One is actually looking at the data. I was always really amazed, if you presented safety data, for example, that said you've got this big safety issue, everyone would respond to that and go, oh, well, the data's telling us. They wouldn't argue about the rights and wrongs or dismiss the data. But I found in the sort of the diversity space that there can be dismissiveness about, whether it matters to us or not, or what's it really telling us. There's sort of a subjectiveness can get applied. So it's actually caring, looking at the information available, and listening to people. And we all know, and respecting people and showing that you want to hear from them. And you don't have to agree with everybody, but giving people, space and time to be heard, and having that as part of your thinking. So it's really just the humanistic sort of approach of caring for another person and understanding their perspective and their world. And, there's a lot of different lenses. We all have our own lens, and they're all completely unique. And, I guess people want to put a bit of a value on that, or an idea of what's useful and what's not. But if you actually step back and go, you know what, who knows? But let's just listen and pay attention. And I think it's also when you see somebody perhaps do something that does, that marginalises someone. And so I remember I was it was a function, an event not that long ago, and I was in a group, I don't know, 5 or 6 people, and a man came and stood in front of me when we were in a conversation, and then just started talking to the people I was talking to, and CEO at the time. and then I was just essentially cut out. And none of the other people in that group made a move to go, oh, hang on, we'll just bring Kirsten back into this. Or, it was really that blatant, and nobody kind of noticed. So sometimes and we've all had those experiences where we've been diminished, disrespected, ignored, our voices haven't been heard. You've said something, and 5 minutes later someone else in the room says it, and suddenly it's like everyone heard it, but they didn't when you said it. So it's, it is what are we paying attention to? Who are we listening to? How are we making space for, for others, for a broader group of people to be part of something meaningful and purposeful, and to be involved. So, and what am I doing if I see, the opposite happening, and I'm seeing people being excluded? We've all had the situation where we've, maybe tripped up in front of a group of people, and that's embarrassing. But there's a big difference between 2 or 3 people coming over and going, you okay, versus 2 or 3 people standing back and laughing at you.
That's right. Or pretending it didn't happen and noticing you're injured and not doing anything to help.
And that sense of belonging comes from a sense of safety, that you can be pretty comfortable being yourself. You can say something, and I've said plenty of stupid things in my life, and sometimes I might just say something and I then go, oh yeah, that was a bit of a dumb comment, or it's a dumb question. But in those safe places, where you belong, you can do that, and then it'll become just a bit funny, or you can work your way through that. In places that are not like that, then you can be made to feel foolish or marginalised, or someone judges you on one statement and writes you off. So it's how do you, as a leader, create environments that feel safe, that people can belong to, no matter where they're from and no matter how they're representing, and that they can bring different perspectives, lenses, opinions. And you mentioned constructive conflict, I think, earlier in the Tuckman model. It's really important. How do we sit as a team with different perspectives? Because out of that, you get more innovation, better solutions, better culture. It's not about everyone agreeing, but it's how you create a space where people can bring themselves and what they think, and know that they walk out. They might not agree with the decision, but they can walk out feeling heard. So thinking about how you go about that as a leader, I think it's really important.
I like the idea of the safe spaces and holding the space for that respect and inclusion. And I think there's so many ways as Australians we're used to doing things with grace and with humour. Like, someone said something really off colour to me. So 3 leaders are standing around and it was a put down. It wasn't funny. It was a put down. The other leader, who's a lot more modern, didn't say anything. And I think that was a missed opportunity. That would have been an opportunity to say, oh, mate, it's 2024. Like, just he could have made a joke of it. But for me, it was like, how hard do you have to work? What more credentials do you need to earn to be seen as an equal for who you are and what you bring? And it kind of reminded me, not that this person is that influential in my career, but it reminded me that there's still work to be done. And that's why I lean into these conversations, which are still uncomfortable and feel vulnerable as a woman to be talking about gender stuff, because we're so much more than that. But having 2 nieces and thinking, if I don't participate in this, then there's a lot of women and young men as well that are not going to be able to fully realise their potential. And that's a real cost to businesses. It's a resource-based view of strategy problem if we're not fully tapping into the talents of the labour market.
No, that's right. It just doesn't make sense. One of my one of the leaders I worked with off and on for many years, and was a real mentor to me. He says, you always said, I don't want to be promoted because I'm a woman. And I'm like, I don't. I want to be promoted because I'm good at the job. So he remembers that really clearly. So I obviously said it a fair bit. So that was part of the framing too, probably was, and people, I did a radio interview once. It was probably for one of the Equal Futures breakfasts. And I was asked, so, it was almost like, so there's a lot in this for you. And it's like, not really. Like, I'm really quite, I wouldn't say I have no complaints, but I am very happy with my career. What I'm bothered about is where are all the others? That makes no sense to me. So I said, it was much more about, whether it's sending the elevator down or whatever terminology you want to use, how do we, make sure that, because I think the women that were representing feminism so strongly in the 60s and 70s, they did an amazing job. They, a lot of things move forward. You see letters from employers from my mum's generation saying you're terminated, now you're pregnant. You were paid 2/3 of what a man's paid because you're female. So all those things, there was a lot that was overcome, but culturally, the underpinnings were not there. So when you roll through in sort of even the 2000s, there's still these, huge gaps, and we see very, very worrying narrative, particularly out of the US at the moment, and your body, my choice type. The prevalence of that narrative went up something like 4,600 times in a 24-hour period post the election outcome. So it's sort of it's very a big step backward in in that narrative, which is disappointing. But yeah, I think there's still a lot to do, and that broader diversity piece, absolutely. We're high on the privilege tree, and I'm acutely aware of that. So, what can you be doing for people around you to make sure, they are included, they are part of a conversation. If you're at an event and someone's on their own, go over and say hello. So sometimes it's the simple things that can be very helpful.
And someone said to me once when I was starting a very visible role, never underestimate the impact you can make by being you. And it really stuck with me. And I think even that safe and inclusive spaces, when we show up as people that are respectful and kind to others, to everyone, that improves the work environment for everyone. Like it's not about not having a sense of humour. It's about being kind and having that intention of kindness and inclusion. And that's only a good thing, right?
I think so. That's definitely been my approach. And when I did leave my role as CEO, the chair, as they do, did a speech. And one of the things he said is that you walked into the business and it felt safe. He said it was palpable. And look, I didn't, you do your best. You don't really kind of know, but that was absolutely he's in and out of many businesses. So it was a real compliment for him to have felt that, known that, and shared it actually.
Yeah.
For that sense to be pervasive, absolutely. So what other safe? How do you make places, environments, team meetings, etc. Safe? You'll get more out of people will like it more, and they will be able to contribute more fully and wholly if you feel safe. And you can make a mistake or a trip up or say something stupid. It's just not going to matter, because you can move on to the next thing without that sense of shame or that sense of, and Brené Brown talks a lot about shame and the role it plays. And interestingly, actually, the Diversity Council of Australia had a recent, I think it's a podcast event where they talked about burnout and lack of inclusion. I don't know if you've seen that, but I think that's a really interesting idea. And I would say the times that were probably the most exhausting for me were actually the times when I probably didn't feel as strong a sense of belonging or inclusiveness. And it's hard to be in those environments, because how do you anchor? How do you know, where you're at with people if you haven't got, if you don't feel like you really should be there?
Yeah.
Or that the point of you being there is somehow limited by virtue of something like gender or race, ethnicity, background, like things that don't speak at all to how capable you are as a person or a leader. They're just features of who you are.
That's right. That's so powerful. So if you went back in time to your first executive role and started again with all this wisdom and experience, what would you do differently? Is there anything you'd do differently?
There is things I would do differently. I would be kinder to myself.
That's a good one.
I would be much kinder. I'm my own worst critic. And once I learned to manage that, and a lot of that was the help of a coach, things got a lot better for me career-wise and probably in many other ways. So I would be, if you think of your younger self, going back and giving him a hug when they really need it, and who's the person that's going to give you the hug when you do need it. And, I've been lucky. I've had a phenomenally supportive husband around and friends and family and things like that. But so I'd be kinder to myself. I would ask for help sooner and more often. That story I told about, giving someone feedback and it went badly because I didn't plan it properly, and I sort of just wasn't as clear and as I should have been with that sort of, the importance of that discussion. I could have just walked down the hall to someone who was a great mentor to me and said, I'm really nervous about this. What advice would you give me? And I probably could have done it a lot better. I think also the reality is in our hardest times we learn the most. So when sort of it feels like the most is going wrong, or there's the most problems, or there's the most issues, and they're often people issues. Technical problems are kind of are drier and easier to solve, perhaps sometimes in the complexity of humans and their choices and their interactions. If you don't go through the hard times, then you don't learn as much. So it's kind of accepting that, you know, things will go up and down. You will need to sit with discomfort, sometimes intense discomfort. But you need to, and then figure out, how do I work through this? How do I manage it? How do I approach it? Who do I need to speak to? And so I think I would ask, for help sooner and a little bit more often. And I think that would help me more, but you kind of learn that over time as you get sort of, you know, the right support people around you, because it makes you better. And I'm a big, like I said before, big supporter of coaching. I don't, you know, I've had a coach sort of presence for many years in my life, still do. And I just find it's helps me be better at what I do, which is what coaches are for. People sometimes seem to think that's a bit of a, you know, it's remedial or it's to fix a problem. But for me, it's really more about how do I perform better. And it's someone you can speak to. They're not a manager. They're usually not in the business even. It can be confidential. It can be frank, and you can be very vulnerable in that environment. Can be, and that's the most helpful, I think, and helps you sort your thoughts out. If you read Harry Potter a bit like a pensieve, you can sort of.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, well, yeah, because there's a lot going on. Things can be very complex. You know, we've all got home lives and family and work and many, many things going on. So sometimes you need to sort of have an opportunity to sort through it and have a think about things and work out, well, what does matter and what doesn't, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And it's funny that the word can be looked at differently, because Olympians hire coaches. Like, they're gifted and they're so incredible and they work incredibly hard, and they work with a coach to continually grow and stretch.
Correct. And they work with multiple coaches too, probably across different elements of their performance. So that's what I find amazing, that in sport, having coach or coaches makes perfect sense. I think in, you know, actors and things, having, you know, voice coaches and all sorts of different coaches makes everyone would just go, so why wouldn't you, if you're an executive, have somebody who can help you? Because again, it's about not having all the answers. You know, it's being open to the fact that those discussions can support you and help you to be doing things better that you're interested in doing as well as you possibly can. And leading people, I think, is a big responsibility, and you want to be doing that as well as you possibly can. And I know I do it better now than I did it when I was a lot younger. I still remember when I had one report and I said to my boss at the time, you know, they're really happy, and, you know, which is probably the right measure actually, but and I thought I'd done this great job, and he said, well, yeah, okay, reluctantly. And he said, but you've got a lot to learn. And I look back now and it's hilarious, because he was so right. So much, like, I knew nothing much at all at that point. So I did have a lot to learn, and I've learned a lot. So, and some of it's been really uncomfortable.
It's part of the journey. And what's your survival tip for a woman who is just starting out as an executive?
Find your supporters, your people, that in the hard times that you can lean on. And sometimes that won't be about talking about work and advice. It'll just be about having something that's not that, and that you're going out and doing something fun. It's really important. Having really kind of burnt out a couple of times, taking that care of yourself and knowing, I know myself well now, and I know the sorts of signals to look for and to manage early. Whereas when I was much younger, you know, I just kept going and going and going and going and going until then I couldn't go anymore. So, yeah, being kind to yourself, find those supporters and people that are really, gunning for you, and having, outlets outside of, just work, having balance. My life's always been better when it's had an element of balance across, different aspects, and that can feel quite hard to attain. And people have asked me lots about work-life balance. Maybe that's not the terminology anymore, but it's a day-to-day proposition, particularly if you've got children and a lot of things going on. There's not a solution that you can just put in place that will work for years, or it's a very day-to-day thing. So not being too hard on yourself and just working out how do I try and get some of that balance in my life.
Great advice. So Kirsten, thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure that our listeners will get so much gold out of that conversation. And thanks again for all the great advocacy you've done in the Hunter, not just for women in business, but for diversity in the broadest sense. And that journey continues for all of us. If you were inspired by that conversation with Kirsten, please let me know. Kirsten is also a coach and mentor, and you can find Kirsten's details in the show notes. And if you're looking for a coach or mentor to help you thrive at work, you can reach out to either of us today. What a great opportunity. Thank you. Until next time. Thank you for listening. This podcast was recorded on Awabakal country on Australia's East Coast. All advice is general in nature. If you liked this podcast, please like, rate and share. You can connect with me at laurenyles.com.au.